as we go. But let's get started. So, as I said right at the start, for those that have just joined, this is a training all about the do's and don'ts in a general election. It's part of Tipping Point's kind of wider project around the election called Movement Vote. We're just aiming to support as many grassroots groups as possible to get involved and make the most of this general election. So we'll have lots of training resources for you. What this training is going to cover is just, basically an overview of key definitions and restrictions that are applicable to grassroots groups and organisations more generally during a general election period. And, looking to just share sort of common sense advice, invite you to Skillshare anything that you're thinking about, that you have concerns about or knowledge about with others as well. And just a chance to, ask questions and think together about what sort of support and other resources grassroots group might need during this 5-week period and beyond as well, because this isn't the be all and end all. So that's what this training is. What it isn't, I want to sort of add a bit of a disclaimer that I'm not a lawyer. This isn't kind of formal legal advice. What we've done in pulling these resources together is look at pull together lots of different legal briefings from actual lawyers. So at the end of the presentation, which I will share with everyone at the end, there's a list of sort of sources and other resources. A lot of the legal sort of definitions in here come either directly from the Electoral Commission or from a law firm called Bates Wells that's been doing some great work supporting charities and NGOs and others to sort of make sure we're on the right side of the law when it comes to this election. I also want to say this is not intended to dissuade you in any way from doing political campaigning. This is like a really pivotal general election moment, and it's a great opportunity to, make an impact on the issues that all our organisations and groups care about. And that said, we'll go into the do's and don'ts, but definitely don't let this put you off getting involved. It's about kind of being armed with information. But Tipping Point is also not a party political organisation, and this isn't intended to sway you one way or another. So all those disclaimers said, let's dive in. So we're on for an election. It's hard to believe it's only been a week, I guess, since we saw Rishi Sunak drenched in the rain, standing outside Number 10 to the strains of things can only get better, calling the election. But it's on. We're now 1 week into that 6-week period, and it will be on the 4th of July. You'll probably know that. So that means as of today, we've got basically 5 weeks, 25 working days. So how do we make the most of this moment? It's probably useful to just quickly run through a brief sort of timeline of what happens over the next 5 weeks. So tomorrow is actually the date that Parliament kind of gets dissolved. That's 1 week after the election was called. And by the 7th of June, that's when all the parties have to publish their candidate lists. A lot of seats maybe hadn't quite decided. This was a snap election that no one thought was coming this summer, but it is. So by the 7th of June, we will have a list of all the candidates running in every constituency. Another couple of key dates to note is just the 17th of June is the last date that anyone can register to vote. And the day after that, the 18th of June, is the last date that you can register for a postal ballot. So, for example, if you're going to be away on holiday, which might happen if, for example, you're in Northern Ireland or Scotland, where it's already the summer holidays on the 4th of July. So that's important to note. And then obviously polling day, 4th of July, it's on a Thursday, as it always is. Polls will be open 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. So we are already in what's known as the short campaign, the sort of 25 working days that between when an election is called, Parliament's dissolved, and polling day. And so that means that some special rules apply to what we can and can't do. And actually, it's worth noting that a lot of the restrictions that do apply are for the 12-month period or 365 days before polling day. So actually, we've sort of already been in a restricted period since 4th of July last year. So yeah, general election, obviously, like for many groups, organizations, it's a huge opportunity. It's a chance to push forward, our agenda and build relationships with potential future MPs, ministers, parties of government. It's kind of major opportunity for anyone who's seeking to promote our issues, because it's quite rare that we have this window where everyone in Parliament gets fired and has to re-earn our votes, basically. It's somewhat more open to listening to people and groups. And so yeah, lots of people want to use this moment to get their points across, to campaign on the issues that we care about. So massive opportunity, but there is also kind of additional risk, because there are some legal compliance considerations that we just need to be aware of. And yeah, particularly in this short campaign period, there's things that we can do and things that we can't do. So I'm going to go through those now. Once again, I'll say, for those that weren't here right at the beginning, if you want me to slow down, if you want to interrupt and ask questions, please do use the reactions. But I'll pause for questions at different points as well. So going to look at, first of all, kind of what counts as, regulated activity that you have to be a bit careful around. What are some of the spending limits? How to go about if you're thinking of producing any campaigning materials, like the rules around election materials and imprints, and then also like what to make of all this information. As I said right at the start, this isn't about dissuading you from doing anything. It's about just sort of knowing what we can and can't do, and the right ways to go about things to stay on the right side of the law. So there are different rules for who can do what under electoral law, and this training is very much focused on supporting grassroots groups, so not political parties, not candidates. You may wear several hats, but yeah, mostly the groups on this call, I think, will be sort of unincorporated, informal groups, grassroots groups with no particular legal status. So that's what's known as non-party campaigners under electoral law, and that's what we'll focus on today. Basically, non-party campaigners is any organisation or individuals that's campaigning or could be seen to campaign ahead of an election, but not standing for a party or for a seat themselves. So that's the kind of initial focus of what we'll look at, and I hope that those of you that maybe are with larger organisations or whatever on this call, some of this will still apply, but we're looking at kind of non-party campaigners. So I talked for a little bit. I'm going to pause for a second and ask you, what kinds of campaigning can we not do during an election campaign? We're going to go into the answer to this, but I'm keen to hear kind of what sort of things you already know, what you think some of the restrictions might be during this general election campaign. I guess the key thing to say is there's not much that we can't do, which we would normally do in an election period. It's just about how much of it we do, how balanced we are, and the tone of it, and how much you spend doing things. So we're going to go this through in a little bit more detail now, like some of the sort of definitions of what counts as regulated activity and how much of it you can and can't do. Let me just try and share my screen again. I will. You see that okay? Yes. Okay. So, what counts as regulated activity in an election? Basically, the definition up here on screen sort of covers what some of you just said. So there's two sort of tests that need to be met for something to sort of be counted as like restricted. So I'll just read the definition first of all. So basically, any activities that are accessible to the public, that bit's important, so I've underlined it, which can reasonably be regarded as intended to promote or procure the election success of either one or more particular parties, one or more political parties that advocate for particular policies, or one or more candidates who hold like particular sets of opinions or a particular category of candidates. That's fairly broad, but generally it's about, are you doing something which can be reasonably interpreted as intended to sort of persuade the public to vote for a group of candidates, a group of parties, or people that hold like certain positions, basically. So there's an important element in this which I've underlined, which is like accessible to the activities that are accessible to the public. So there's this thing known as the purpose test, where people will, the Electoral Commission would look at kind of the types of campaigning that you're doing and whether or not it's reasonably could be interpreted as like trying to get someone or a party or a set of parties elected or not. But also there's this sort of public test. So we are allowed to talk to our committed supporters about whatever we want and say whatever we want to our committed supporters. But if you're putting something out in the public domain, it can be accessed by someone else and it's party political in one of these three ways, then it would meet the public test and sort of fall under that regulated sort of activity area. So most sort of general campaigning techniques could be caught and like meet this test in the sense that a lot of what we do as campaigners is very public and aimed at kind of getting people, whether it's through posters, protests, social media, media, press releases, it's all like putting stuff out there into the world. But this piece around like the public test is really important. Like, are the materials actually accessible to the public? And that's one of the reasons that we advise grassroots groups to, be really intentional in building up your supporter lists, because you have a lot more flexibility then in what you can and can't say to people in an election period. If they're on your mailing list, in your private Facebook group, or WhatsApp signal group, someone who's signed up to hear from you, you're allowed to say what you want to them. And yeah, they're not counted as the things you say to those people are not counted as part of like influencing the general public. So really important as a group that you have some way of kind of signing people up, basically, to give their consent to hear from you, because it gives you a lot more flexibility. And I think Rona's just going to pop a link in the chat to our tech hub, which is a set of tools and resources that we provide for grassroots groups for free. If you don't already have a mailing list, or whether that's an action network or MailChimp or whatever it is you want to use, we have a set of tools that grassroots groups can use to like create sign-up forms, create mailing lists, email people, that sort of stuff, if you don't have one already. But yeah, really important to yeah, recruit people and get them like as your committed supporters. Okay, I'm going to move on. Let me just check the chat quickly. No questions yet. So I rushed through that a little bit, but what we're going to do now is go into a bit of an exercise to look at some examples of types of activities that, groups regularly engage in when it's not an election period necessarily, and think about like, would they count as regulated activity or not in this next 6-week period? And then we'll sort of, I'm going to put you into a couple of groups just to chat in a smaller group, think through some of these examples, try and figure out just for 5 minutes or so, where you think they sit, what are the considerations that you have to think through. And then we'll come back and kind of walk through some of these like real life examples, and use them to sort of get a better understanding of what we can and can't do, and then the spending limits around them we'll go into next. Does that make sense? So just before, I think Rona is going to put a list of these things in the chat so that when we put you into groups, you've got, a reference point. But just to walk through some of these examples before you go off into a little group. So a website comparing the climate voting record of MPs. Where does that sit, do you think? A supporter email. So, you mail out your mailing list and say, here's the position of all the candidates in our constituency on refugees or on the Rwanda policy, for example. What about giving out stickers to people that say vote for no new oil? Have a think about stickers and the message in this example. Or again, a poster, window poster that says, I won't vote for Tories. Again, just an example. Or social media posts, so a tweet or an Instagram post that says, thank you at so-and-so MP for signing our pledge on whatever issue you're campaigning on. Think through that one. And then again, and not just another example of an Instagram post calling the current Prime Minister a liar. Where do you think that sits? In this bucket, or this bucket? It's fine to be unsure. The whole point of this is just to generate a bit of discussion around the sorts of things that we need to start considering. So, Rona, if you're ready, would you mind just opening up the breakout groups, and you'll just be with like 2 or 3 people, just say hi, have a go at talking through some of these examples, and then we'll come back in about 5 minutes or so. We'll go into all of that. I'll just share my screen again. So, yeah, so basically any and all of these examples could fall into regulated activities, apart from maybe the email and the window poster, which you just correctly identified. The important point is that, basically context matters. The framing, the tone, the volume, and the audience of the materials can all determine whether or not it's regulated. Basically, for the next 5 weeks, if you're in doubt, just assume that any sort of materials you're producing, any messages you're putting out there into the public domain would count as regulated activity. And you know, election materials could mean basically, you know, any, it is not just printed things, it could be anything that's digital content as well. So any of these things here, whether it's kind of, you know, social media posts, posters, or on a much larger scale, you know, drawing a big mural on your wall at home, or giving out stickers, websites, audio content is also counted, as of last November, is counted as sort of, yeah, potentially regulated material. So again, it's not that you can't produce any of these things, there are just certain rules around it. As I was just saying previously, basically under election law, you're required to essentially put an imprint, what's known as an imprint. That's just a statement that sets out, like, transparently who's behind the content. So whether it's a website or a podcast, or, you know, printing posters, you just need to put, if you're, you know, if you're printing them, whether you're an individual or a group, you know, this is promoted by, you know, Louise Hazan of XYZ address in Oxford, where I am. I've got an example there of, you know, there's a Chris Packham has promoted a website, you know, over the last year, that lets people download and print their own posters. It's not, the posters themselves are not printed by him, they're not, but they are, you know, clearly electoral materials. And so there's just at the bottom of the website where you download these posters, there's an imprint that says who's behind it and who's made them and who's made the website. So, you know, hypothetically, if you were to download these posters by scanning this QR code in the presentation, you know, you can do that, you can print them off, you can distribute them, but you would need to update the little footer that says, you know, who's printed off these posters, and you know, be transparent about, so someone can reach you basically if they have any issue with them. So again, doesn't matter if you're a group or an individual, I would recommend during an election, sort of any materials that are related to elections, you know, voting intentions, etc., to make those transparently sort of have an imprint. Yeah, clear, nice. Good segue into the spending limits. So again, I'll just check that's visible. Is that okay? So I've said this a few times, but again, it's not unlawful to do any of the things that are, you know, count as regulated activity in an election period. It's just that the amount you can spend doing them is regulated. Now, you've just asked me how much you can spend, so rather than asking you, I'll go straight on to the answer, which is that if you're a UK group, in the full 365 days period before an election, i.e. since 4th of July last year, you can spend a maximum of £10,000 on regulated activity before you would then have to be registered with the Electoral Commission. Now, as a grassroots group with very little funding, you know, maybe a small amount of donations coming in, it's very unlikely that you would breach that limit. But it is worth noting that if you are working together in a coalition of groups towards a common plan or arrangement, what's known as sort of joint campaigning, then however much you spend jointly, however much each member of that coalition spends, adds up to a total amount, and that £10,000 limit covers everyone, everyone's spending. And when we talk about spending, it's not just, money spent on, for example, printing posters. That would be an awful lot of posters. It counts, it means essentially the maximum value of the activities that you can undertake. So including, any paid staff time, which again, grassroots groups often, in most cases, don't have any paid staff. So it's a huge benefit basically that you have volunteers who are, maybe doing door knocking or distributing flyers or posters. None of those things count as spending because volunteers are not paid. But it counts anything from spending on leaflets, venue premises, venues for hustings, hiring of PA equipment, any sort of costs that you might incur that are connected to a regulated activity that we've covered. So it's £10,000 for the last year, basically up until 4th of July. There's slightly different limits if you're that's UK wide. Slightly different limits if you are campaigning just within one constituency. So you can spend up to £700 specifically, on spending that is aimed at getting one candidate or party elected within a constituency. So that's during this short campaign. So from basically the 25 working days until the 4th of July, that 6-week period since the election has been called, £700. So again, it's a small limit, but unlikely as a group, if you are going to be printing some posters, maybe hiring a hall and a PA system to organize a hustings or something, you're unlikely to reach that limit unless you're going really big. And for the full year, if you're registered as a non-party campaigner, then you can spend this amount, 17,500 in one constituency. That's the limit. But £700 is the number to remember, basically. One other thing to be mindful of is there's sort of an exception around what's I've put it in quotes there, like ongoing campaigns. So if you're just continuing to, share the same messages as you have over the last year or previous, period before the regulated period, that will generally be considered as ongoing campaigning, and it wouldn't pass the purpose test, so it wouldn't even be regulated activity. It's only really if, you're tailoring your messaging to be specifically around candidates, parties, the election moment. So that's another sort of caveat to just be mindful of, which gives you a bit more leeway. And also I will say that, obviously it's too late for this to be a question anyway, because we are very much in the regulated period, but important to note for future electoral moments that, you can't print thousands of pounds worth of materials before you enter the election period and then only distribute them in the regulated period. That would still count as part of your spending. It doesn't matter when you spend it, it's about when you use the materials. So just in case you were wondering that. Is that all clear so far? Are there any specific questions or things that, Catherine, come in.
Yeah.
So a few more things to be extra careful about, I guess, over the next 5 weeks. These are always things that I would suggest any group keeps in mind, but it's just a good idea to be extra squeaky clean and mindful of these things. You know, we're all potentially under more scrutiny. So GDPR, this is about data protection. You know, obviously only email or text people who've consented to be contacted by you in that way. So that's going back again to the point about, you know, making sure you've got the tools and systems in place to be building up a supporter list, because that just gives you so much more freedom. But yeah, don't do any mass mail shots of data that is not your data, or you could get in trouble. Intellectual property. So if you're designing posters, videos, whatever it might be, just make sure you've got the rights to use those images. There's, you know, in the link that I shared earlier to template posters, you know, in Canva, there's a huge library of things you're allowed to use for free. Just make sure you don't grab things off the internet without checking the rights to an image or video. Defamation and false statements, I guess, you know, people are particularly sensitive during an election period, and, you know, it's heightened emotions. There's a lot at stake. So it's just about, you know, making sure that you don't share anything that's untrue about candidates, parties, their positions. Just make sure you've fact checked everything, you've got evidence to back it up, or you could be, you know, guilty of defamation. And then also, you know, this goes back to the question that someone said about we still have the, you know, the right to free speech, to put a poster that says whatever we want in our own windows, to say what we want as individuals. You know, we all still have the right to express opinions freely, both out loud through protests, and, you know, to publish them in whatever ways we want. There's just these restrictions around them in an election. So again, don't be discouraged from sharing your opinions, saying what you need to as a group on the issues that matter to you. Just be mindful. Also, just a quick recap of the do's and don'ts. Basically, do keep campaigning, do keep recruiting supporters onto your list, so that you've got more people you can reach and say what you want to say to directly without some of these restrictions. Do keep people, you know, informed, and encourage people to vote. It's really important in an election like this, where the stakes are so high. If you are spending any money, then I would just recommend you keep track of costs. You know, have someone in your group who's responsible for just keeping receipts for things, in case, you know, you ever do need to account for how much you spent up to that limit. And do work together with other groups. You know, obviously this joint campaigning limit happens, but this is a really key moment for us to be collaborating, whether it's on hustings or on, you know, whatever it might be around key issues that our movements care about. In terms of the don'ts, you know, don't stop speaking out. Don't exceed £700 spending per constituency. Don't be party political, and don't tell people, you know, to vote for one candidate or another. Like, it's just not generally a good idea. Just try and speak about the issues that you care about rather than particular candidates. That's it. It's 1 o'clock exactly. I'm just going to very quickly show you my last couple of slides. I would encourage you to get in touch with me by email if you have any follow-up questions. And I definitely encourage you to sign up to our Movement Vote project, because we'll be running, you know, between now and the 4th of July, a whole series of trainings on other things that might be helpful for you, particularly if you're considering doing any stunts or creative actions or organising a hustings. And I'm going to share a link by email to this presentation, so you can click through to, you know, any of these source materials as well. If you do want to find out a bit more about the Movement Vote project, I'm actually doing another call later tonight. I'm going to take a quick break before then, but 7 p.m. tonight on Zoom again, to sort of lay out some of the other materials and support that we've got available. And on our trainings website, you can see which other sessions are available. Basically going to be doing a lot of training in the next few weeks. And the final thing is just to say, we do all of the resources and trainings that we provide are free for groups. We rely on donations and grants to make this happen. So if you happen to be in a position to give us a small monthly donation, that's always very welcome, but no obligation whatsoever. And that's it. Thank you all very much. I hope this was useful, and hopefully see lots of you on the call again tonight, or over the coming weeks at another training.
Thank you, Louise. Very useful.
I'm really glad to hear that.